It is the late evening of a New York summer in 1899, far above the city, in a rented room lit only by the glow of a single gas lamp. A slender figure sits perfectly still, listening to something no one else can hear. Below him, the streets buzz with the noise of trolley cars and factory whistles. Above him, the sky trembles with distant lightning. On the desk before him lies an open notebook filled with diagrams that seem to belong to another century, circles within circles, waves crossing waves, lines stretching outward like roots searching for water. He adjusts the cuffs of his worn suit, picks up a pencil, and draws one last curve across the page. The room flashes white as thunder shakes the windows. Nikola Tesla lifts his head. To most people, the storm outside is nothing more than weather. To him, it is a language, one he has been trying to translate since childhood. He was a man who lived in two worlds at once, the one shaped by the limits of the present, and another that shimmered just ahead of human understanding. A world of wireless light, machines that could think, power drawn from the earth itself, and communication that circled the globe in an instant. A world that seemed impossible to his contemporaries, but entirely natural to him. Tonight we follow this extraordinary mind from the quiet villages of the Austro-Hungarian frontier to the roaring heart of the American industrial age. We will walk with him through the dim laboratories of Manhattan, across the thunder-swept plains of Colorado Springs, and finally to the lonely tower he built on Long Island, a tower meant to touch the sky and remake civilization. This is not just the story of an inventor. It is the story of a man who treated imagination as a scientific instrument, whose visions ran so far ahead of his century that the world is only now beginning to catch up. Before we begin, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps others discover these explorations of history, and it supports the creation of more bedtime biographies like this one. So settle in, breathe slowly, and let the noise of the day drift away. Tonight, we trace the life of a dreamer who believed that energy, thought, and nature spoke the same secret language, a language he tried all his life to teach us how to hear. This is the bedtime biography of Nikola Tesla. This is the story of how he imagined the future. The story begins in the summer of 1856, in a small village called Smiljan, tucked into the mountains of the Austro-Hungarian frontier. It was a night people in the region would remember for years. A storm had descended on the valley with a violence that felt almost supernatural, lightning splitting the sky into white rivers, thunder rolling across the fields like the hooves of an invisible army. Inside a modest farmhouse, a woman lay in labor. Her husband knelt beside her, holding a candle that flickered each time the wind pressed against the wooden shutters. As another bolt of lightning shook the house, the midwife whispered that a child born in such a storm could be touched by dark omens. But Tesla's mother, Juka, refused to believe that. "No," she said, her voice steady even as the storm raged. "This child will be a child of light." At that exact moment, a final burst of lightning illuminated the room from wall to wall, and the cry of a newborn rose above the thunder. His name would be Nikola Tesla, and the storm that accompanied his arrival would become one of the defining metaphors of his life. From the beginning, Nikola was different. Children in the village played with stones and sticks. He played with visions, strange, vivid images that appeared before him without warning, bursts of light, patterns of energy, landscapes he had never seen. They frightened him at first. He would often cover his eyes, but the images remained, shimmering behind the darkness. When he later wrote about these early years, Tesla said he felt as if his mind were a receiver, tuned to a signal that did not belong entirely to this world. His mother understood him better than anyone else. Though she had little formal education, she was an inventor in her own quiet way, designing household tools, memorizing long poems and solving practical problems with a creativity that astonished those around her. Tesla would later say that whatever genius he possessed came from her, not from books or universities. But there was something else too, something deeper. The landscape of his childhood, with its endless horizon and restless storms, awakened a fascination in him that would never fade. While other children hid when lightning struck, Nikola would run to the window, pressing his hands against the glass. What was that force? How did it move? Why did it dance across the sky with such effortless beauty? Electricity to him was not merely a natural phenomenon. It was a language, a presence, a living whisper from the future. When he was old enough, he began to read everything he could find. Mathematics, physics, stories of explorers and inventors. But even as he absorbed knowledge, he found himself returning to a single question. What is the invisible thread that connects all things? In the fields behind his house, he would lie on the grass at dusk, watching the stars appear, imagining the world not as it was, but as it might someday be, connected by energy, illuminated by power drawn from nature, shaped by inventions not yet built. He was still only a boy, but the direction of his life was already set. He did not choose electricity. Electricity, in a way, chose him. Years later, when he was a grown man lecturing in America, someone asked Tesla when he first realized he wanted to change the world. He paused, remembering the storms of his childhood. "I did not imagine the future," he said softly. "I saw it, and it all began on that thunder-torn night in Smiljan, the night the lightning child was born." In the years that followed, the storms quieted, but Nikola's mind did not. By the time he reached adolescence, he had developed a habit that puzzled and occasionally alarmed those around him. He would stop speaking in the middle of a sentence, his gaze drifting towards some invisible point beyond the room. Moments later, he would return, unaware that anything unusual had happened. Friends assumed he was daydreaming. His family knew better. These were not dreams. They were visions, detailed, luminous, and completely involuntary. Tesla described them as sudden eruptions of imagery, so vivid that they would blot out the physical world. A distant landscape might appear before him with perfect clarity, down to each blade of grass. A machine he had never seen would rotate in space as if suspended by an unseen hand. Sometimes the images were accompanied by bursts of light, shimmering arcs that left him momentarily blinded. He called them flashes, but they were more like interruptions from another dimension of thought. He was not frightened by them, not anymore, but he was restless in a way that had no name in the 19th century. His father, Milutin, had hoped Nikola would follow him into the priesthood. The Serbian Orthodox Church offered stability, prestige, a respectable life. But even as a young boy, Tesla resisted anything that resembled constraint. Kneeling in prayer, he would secretly solve mathematical equations in his head. While the congregation recited liturgy, he traced imaginary circuits across the stone floor with his eyes. Religion offered certainty. Tesla did not want certainty. He wanted questions, endless, unsolved questions. His mother sensed this, and she became his quiet ally. She encouraged his peculiar habits, even when they bordered on obsessive. When he dismantled household devices to understand their inner workings, she did not scold him. When he ran through the fields chasing the shadow of a bird to study its flight, she simply watched with a soft smile. She understood that his mind was a living instrument, one that needed space to vibrate freely. By his teenage years, Tesla had developed abilities so unusual that he felt compelled to hide them. He could memorize entire books after a single reading. He could perform complex calculations intuitively, not as sequences of numbers, but as shapes and movements projected in his imagination. Words, too, took form inside him, not as sounds, but as architecture, as if each idea built itself like a cathedral behind his eyes. But this extraordinary cognition came at a cost. At night, he lay awake for hours, unable to stop the parade of images. Sometimes he would rise from bed, pacing in silence to calm what he called the storm within the mind. He wrote later that his thoughts felt like a river in flood, powerful and uncontainable, dragging him forward whether he wished it or not. Others sought rest from the world. Nikola sought rest from himself. When illness nearly claimed him at 17, a fever so severe that doctors were certain he would die, he found himself confronting something he had never considered, the possibility that his restless mind might abruptly end. Lying in bed, drenched in sweat, he whispered one request to his father: "If you allow me to study engineering, I will live." It was not a dramatic bargaining of a desperate youth. It was simply the truth. In that moment, Tesla saw his future with absolute clarity. He did not want a life of doctrine. He wanted a life of discovery. Milutin, shaken by the closeness of death, agreed. And soon, as if bound by an internal command, Tesla rose from his illness with renewed energy, thin, exhausted, but determined. His restlessness transformed into direction. His visions, once chaotic, began to assemble themselves into ideas, shapes, systems. He no longer merely saw flashes, he began to understand them. This was the beginning of a lifelong pattern. Every crisis, every illness, every moment of collapse would push Tesla into a new realm of thought. His imagination did not quiet. It sharpened. He had been born in a storm, and it seemed he carried one inside him still. Soon that inner storm would lead him toward a breakthrough that would change the world forever. But first, he needed something he had never truly possessed: discipline, structure, and a place where his restless mind could finally find direction. That place would be the technical schools of Central Europe, and the discovery waiting there would propel him into history. When Tesla left Smiljan for his formal studies, he carried with him no machines, no tools, no sketches, only his mind. And that mind, as he would soon discover, operated according to rules no professor could teach and no textbook could fully contain. In the classrooms of the Technical University in Graz, his abilities began to reveal themselves in ways that startled both students and instructors. During a lecture on electrical engineering, a professor demonstrated a new piece of machinery, a Gram dynamo, explaining its construction and operation in meticulous detail. Most students copied the diagrams, filling their notebooks with rough sketches and formulas. Tesla simply watched. The next day, without referencing notes, he reproduced the entire mechanism in his mind, every bolt, every gear, every coil, rotating it in space, altering its parts, improving its efficiency. To him, the machine was not a device, but a living idea, one he could examine the way a surgeon studies anatomy. It was during these years that Tesla's most extraordinary gift matured: the ability to design, test, and refine inventions entirely in his imagination, with a precision that rivaled physical engineering. He did not draw blueprints. He forged them in consciousness. This mental world was vivid beyond anything his peers could fathom. Tesla wrote later that when he imagined a machine, he could feel its texture, hear the hum of its movement, smell the heat rising from its coils. If a part was misaligned, he sensed friction. If a design flaw existed, he discovered it not through experiment, but through intuition refined into something approaching clairvoyance. He did not dream of inventions. He performed them internally. No drafting paper, no prototypes, only pure thought made tangible. This unique form of cognition bewildered his professors. They considered it brilliance verging on delusion. How could a young man claim accuracy without physical models? How could he assert that machinery tested in his mind would function in the real world? But Tesla's memory and imagination were not vague or poetic. They were instruments of calculation sharp enough to predict mechanical behavior with astonishing fidelity. It was both a blessing and a burden, for Tesla did not control his imagination so much as negotiate with it. Visions appeared unbidden. Childhood flashes evolved into intricate geometric structures, symmetries unfolding like crystalline flowers suspended in the air. Words triggered images. Images triggered sensations. Ideas came bundled with their consequences. This was no longer mere perception. It was construction. He once said that every invention existed for him in two lives, one internal and one external. The internal version was always more perfect, smooth, silent, precise in proportions only the mind could sustain. The external version, made of imperfect materials and subject to the hands of imperfect craftsmen, was always a dim reflection of the original. Perhaps this is why he preferred to linger in thought rather than rush toward physical creation. Imagination did not break, rust, or disappoint. During this period, Tesla also developed the peculiar habit of walking long distances, sometimes 10 miles or more, lost in thought. He would choose a rhythm of steps, synchronize it with an idea, and allow the cadence to refine the thought until it reached clarity. When he returned home, the solution felt inevitable, as if it had been waiting for him in the quiet spaces between footsteps. These walks became essential. They gave form to what he called his mental laboratory. There, he could summon memories with absolute fidelity. He could recall entire pages of books he had read years earlier. His roommate once tested him by asking about a complex passage from Goethe. Tesla recited it word for word, even matching the page layout. He admitted later that he didn't just remember the passage, he remembered the feeling of reading it. Memory for him was not storage, it was recreation. And yet, despite the beauty of this inner world, it was also isolating. Students admired him, but few felt they truly knew him. He seemed detached, distant, living half in solid reality and half in a realm accessible only to him. At meals, he often sat quietly, eyes fixed on nothing, while ideas rearranged themselves inside him like stars finding new constellations. A professor once tried to reprimand him for daydreaming, only to discover Tesla had been silently correcting errors in the instructor's arithmetic. The reprimand became praise, but the moment revealed something deeper. Tesla was already drifting beyond the conventional boundaries of education. He was no longer learning engineering, he was becoming it. The true breakthrough, however, would come not in the classroom, but in the midst of crisis, when his inner world collided with exhaustion, overwork, and the first signs of collapse. From that collision would emerge the idea that changed the modern world: the rotating magnetic field, the foundation of alternating current power. But before the revelation, Tesla would have to fall. Imagination alone, even a prodigious imagination, could not shield him from the demands of the material world. And the material world was about to push back. Grass was meant to be a turning point, a place where Tesla could finally anchor his restless mind in structured study. Yet from the moment he arrived, it became clear that his relationship with education would never be simple. The university offered lectures, laboratories, and the promise of scientific order. Tesla brought with him something far more volatile, a mind already overflowing with untested visions. In the lecture halls, he sat upright, devouring every word his instructors spoke. His professors noticed the intensity in him, the way his eyes burned not with curiosity, but with recognition, as if the principles being taught were not discoveries, but confirmations of things he had intuited long before entering the classroom. But there was one subject that stirred something in him deeper than all others: electrical engineering. One winter afternoon, a professor demonstrated a direct current motor, explaining its operation with great enthusiasm. Tesla watched the machine shudder and spark, the brushes scraping against the commutator, the inefficiency practically visible in the strain of the moving parts. To the class, the demonstration was impressive. To Tesla, it was intolerable. The machine was crude, noisy, flawed. It worked, yes, but it was fundamentally wrong. How can we accept a system, Tesla whispered to a classmate, that destroys itself while it operates? His professor overheard and smiled politely, assuming Tesla's remark came from youthful arrogance. But Tesla was not being arrogant. He was seeing something others did not. A world where electricity flowed in graceful symmetry, where machines rotated without friction, where power moved like breath rather than labor. He saw the future, but he had not yet found the path to reach it. As the academic pressure increased, Tesla pushed himself beyond reasonable limits. He studied late into the night, memorizing entire textbooks, solving equations in his mind before committing them to paper. His professors often doubted his claims until he proved them flawlessly again and again. But brilliance, especially when paired with sleeplessness, is a fragile thing. By the end of his second year, Tesla's health began to falter. The visions that had once been sources of inspiration now intruded with overwhelming force. Instead of neat diagrams and elegant machines, he saw flashes of light that disoriented him, geometric vortices spinning too fast to interpret. His appetite vanished. His hands trembled, his thoughts fragmented under their own intensity. Eventually, he reached a breaking point. He stopped attending classes. He stopped sleeping. He walked the streets of Graz in a haze of exhaustion, unable to quiet the storm within his mind. His professors assumed he had succumbed to indiscipline. His classmates assumed he had given up. Tesla himself assumed nothing at all. He simply drifted. When he left Graz, he did so without ceremony. No degree, no farewell, only the weight of failure pressing on his shoulders. But failures for Tesla were rarely endings. They were transitions, thresholds to new forms of clarity. He traveled to Prague, partly to escape, partly to renew his studies, and partly because he felt he had to keep moving, as if motion itself prevented his imagination from collapsing inward. Prague was different from Graz, older, quieter, steeped in the traditions of Central European scholarship. Here, Tesla attended lectures unofficially, absorbing ideas even though he was not formally enrolled. His mind, though fragile, began to stabilize. He walked across the Charles Bridge at dusk, watching the lamplight strike the water, imagining circuits of energy hidden within the flow of the river. And slowly something shifted. The disorder in his thoughts began to arrange itself into a pattern. The flashes of light no longer frightened him. They felt like the prelude to something coherent, something waiting to emerge. He sensed that the idea he had been chasing, some invisible mechanism, some elegant symmetry, was drawing closer. Still, the breakthrough would not come in Prague, not yet. He needed one more crisis, one more collapse, before clarity arrived. It was in Budapest, months later, standing with a friend in a quiet city park, that the long-awaited revelation would burst through his mind with the force of lightning. But before that moment, before the joy, before the shock, before the equation that would change the world, Tesla had to walk through one more valley of exhaustion, doubt, and wandering. For innovation in Tesla's life was never born of comfort. It was born of necessity, of restlessness, of collapse giving way to illumination. And the greatest illumination of his early life was only one season away. By the time Tesla arrived in Budapest in early 1882, he was, in many ways, a man divided against himself. His body was weakened from months of overwork and illness, and his spirit held together only by the thinnest threads of willpower. He had left Graz in despair, wandered through Prague with no clear direction, and now found himself in a city he did not know, among people he did not yet understand. But Budapest held something that Graz and Prague did not. A pause, a quiet in which the mind, even Tesla's storm-swept mind, could begin again. He found employment at the Central Telegraph Office, a modest job that demanded little more than discipline and routine. For someone else, it might have been dreary work, For Tesla, it was a reprieve, a temporary shelter from the relentless demands of academia and the torment of unfinished ideas. The city itself offered a gentler rhythm, morning fog rising over the Danube, the slow turning of trams along the wide avenues, the sound of church bells drifting across the rooftops. In this setting, Tesla slowly rebuilt himself. He walked constantly, miles each day, often accompanied by his friend and future employer, Anthony Sagati. These walks became a kind of therapy. As they moved through the parks and along the riverbanks, Tesla would speak in fragments, trying to articulate the idea that had been haunting him for years, a form of electrical power unbound from the rigid machinery of direct current. But the idea remained elusive. He felt it circling just beyond reach, like a word resting on the tip of the tongue. During this period, Tesla's health fluctuated dramatically. Some days he felt strong, clear-headed, brimming with energy. Other days, the visions returned, scattered flashes of light, accompanied by a trembling sensation that left him weak and disoriented. And yet, beneath the exhaustion, something new was forming. His mind, tempered by suffering, began to work differently. What had once been chaotic now approached a kind of discipline. The visions no longer overwhelmed him. They assembled themselves with purpose. The breakthrough, however, arrived the way lightning arrives, without warning, without apology, without hesitation. One February afternoon, Tesla and Sagati were walking in City Park, reciting poetry to pass the time, a habit Tesla cherished. He loved the precision of verse, the way language could crystallize emotion and thought. That day, he chose lines from Goethe's Faust, a passage that spoke of the sun's eternal motion. The glow retreats, done is the day of toil, it yonder hastes, new fields of life exploring. As he finished the verse, Tesla stopped abruptly. His breath caught in his throat. His eyes widened, not with fear, but with recognition. Later he would write that the idea struck him like a flash of lightning. The rotating magnetic field. It was not merely an insight. It was the answer he had been seeking since the first moment he saw a flawed DC motor straining against its own design. He saw, fully formed in his mind, a field that rotated without friction, a magnetic current that moved like a wheel guided by invisible hands. He grabbed a stick from the ground and drew a diagram in the dirt, a circle divided into segments, each segment representing a phase of alternating current. As he drew, the shapes came alive for him. He could see the magnetic field spinning, pulling the rotor with perfect smoothness. Sagati watched in confusion as Tesla, half whispering, half shouting, began pacing in wide circles, tracing imaginary lines in the air. "It is real!" Tesla cried. "The solution is real, and it has been with me all along." That moment in the park changed everything. In the days that followed, Tesla felt his energy return with greater force than ever before. He spent hours each night refining the concept, turning the rotating field in his imagination, accelerating it, slowing it, testing its limits. The alternating current motor, the foundation of the modern electrical world, was born not in a laboratory but in the quiet fields of Budapest, during a walk at the recitation of a poem. The revelation lifted him out of despair. It restored his direction. It gave shape to his restless genius. Tesla later wrote that the moment felt as if the earth itself had opened and revealed its inner secrets. For once, the storm within his mind had produced not turmoil, but clarity so profound that it altered the trajectory of human progress. He had the idea. Now he needed a world willing to build it, and that world waited across the ocean. In the spring of 1884, with only a few coins in his pocket, a bundle of clothing, and a head filled with inventions that existed nowhere except in the theater of his mind, Nikola Tesla boarded a steamship bound for the United States. The journey was long, restless, and crowded, an ocean crossing full of noise and motion, neither of which offered him comfort. But Tesla did not come for comfort. He came for a chance. Europe had given him education, discovery, hardship, and revelation. America, he believed, would give him freedom, the freedom to build what he saw in his imagination, the freedom to shape a world still in the making. And so he watched the horizon as the ship cut through the Atlantic, the wind carrying the scent of salt and coal, and waited for the moment when the skyline of New York would rise like a promise from the sea. He arrived with 4 cents, a book of poetry, and a letter of introduction addressed to the world's most celebrated inventor, Thomas Edison. The contrast between the two men could not have been sharper. Edison was the embodiment of American pragmatism, hands-on, impatient, driven by relentless experimentation. He worked through trial and error, building and rebuilding until something functioned well enough to be sold. His laboratory was a place of wires, tubes, and ceaseless activity. Tesla, by contrast, worked entirely in the realm of thought. He perfected ideas before touching a single tool. His laboratory existed first in his imagination and only later in the physical world. Where Edison saw machines, Tesla saw principles. Where Edison saw problems, Tesla saw patterns. Where Edison sought immediate practicality, Tesla sought elegance. These two philosophies would soon collide. Tesla's early days in America were humbling. He worked as a laborer, digging ditches for $2 a day. At night, he returned to his rented room, lit a candle, and filled notebooks with designs for motors and systems the world had not yet conceived. He later wrote that even in those bleak moments, he felt himself moving towards something inevitable. "My energies were limitless," he said. "My poverty could not restrain me." Word of his abilities reached Edison's company, and before long, Tesla found himself standing in the famous inventor's office. Edison regarded him with curiosity, this tall, slender European with piercing eyes and a foreign accent. When Tesla described his alternating current concept, Edison waved a dismissive hand. "Too complicated," Edison said. "Too impractical. Stick to direct current. That is the future." Tesla said nothing, but inside he disagreed with every word. Still, he accepted a position at Edison's company. He worked tirelessly, redesigning generators, improving motors, solving problems that others deemed impossible. His devotion impressed even Edison, who admired Tesla's endurance, though never fully grasping the depth of his intellect. But tension simmered beneath the surface. Edison valued persistence. Tesla valued perfection. One favored brute force, the other favored elegance. And slowly, inevitably, their differences grew into disagreement. The final break came over money, though the true rift ran deeper. Edison allegedly promised Tesla a large bonus for improving his generators. Tesla delivered, exceeding expectations, and Edison refused to pay, claiming it had been a joke. Whether the incident happened exactly as later described is uncertain, but its impact on Tesla was real. He resigned. He walked out of Edison's empire with no money, no allies, and no clear plan. Yet he felt lighter than he had in months. He had not crossed an ocean to spend his life maintaining another man's machines. He had come to build a new electrical world, one shaped not by the limitations of the present, but by the possibilities of the future. And soon a man named George Westinghouse would give him the platform he needed. But before that partnership could reshape the modern world, Tesla would first endure another season of hardship, digging ditches again, wandering the streets of New York alone, repeating a truth he held close: "I can see the future. I only need the world to catch up." He had left behind the familiar landscapes of Europe. He had stepped into the raw electric heartbeat of America. Now, with a few loyal friends and an idea powerful enough to remake civilization, Tesla was ready for the next chapter of his life, the chapter that would ignite the greatest technological rivalry of the age. When Tesla entered Edison's workshop on Guerck Street, he stepped into a world that pulsed with noise, smoke, and the relentless pace of American invention. Sparks flew from metal tables, belts snapped across pulleys, workers hurried between benches with armfuls of tools, and the air carried the smell of hot copper and oil. To many, this was the epicenter of progress. To Tesla, it was chaos. Productive chaos, yes, but chaos nonetheless. Edison thrived in it. He moved from station to station, sleeves rolled, eyes sharp, hair unkempt, issuing instructions with the natural authority of someone who believed firmly in the value of intuition and sweat. His genius was undeniable, but so was his impatience. He valued results, not elegance. He believed in building machines the way a blacksmith hammers iron, through force, trial, and perseverance. Tesla stood apart, tall, composed, immaculate even in the workshop's grime, with an intensity of focus that made him seem almost spectral among the bustling workers. The collision of these two men, two minds, two methods, two visions of electricity, was inevitable. At first, Edison did not quite know what to make of him. Tesla spoke of alternating current in long, precise sentences, describing electrical transformations as though they were mathematical poetry. He envisioned systems that rebuilt themselves through symmetry, currents that reversed direction like breath, magnetic fields that rotated without friction, machines that operated with the effortless grace of clockwork, guided by natural law. Edison listened, glanced at the sketches Tesla drew in the air with his hands, and then shook his head. Alternating current is dangerous, he said. It kills. People won't accept it. Tesla tried to explain the physics, the efficiency, the elegance, the universality of alternating current, but the argument fell against a wall built from years of Edison's experience with direct current systems already installed across the city. Innovation for Edison was evolutionary. Innovation for Tesla was revolutionary. This difference was not philosophical, it was foundational. Despite their disagreements, Edison recognized Tesla's raw talent. He hired him to solve problems that had plagued the company's equipment for months. And Tesla delivered again and again, correcting flaws in dynamos, redesigning entire systems with precision that left Edison's assistants whispering late into the night. But admiration is not the same as understanding. While Tesla saw machines as manifestations of universal principles, Edison saw them as tools to be built, sold, and scaled. Electricity for Tesla was a language. For Edison, it was a commodity. The two men worked side by side, yet lived in different worlds. One evening, Tesla approached Edison with a proposal to redesign the company's direct current generators from the ground up. The improvement, he claimed, would increase their efficiency dramatically. Edison laughed. "You're a clever fellow, Tesla," he said, "but you don't understand the American business mind. If we adopt your system now, we will undermine everything we've already built." Then, as the story later circulated, Edison jokingly promised $50,000 if Tesla succeeded. Tesla took the challenge seriously. Edison reportedly did not. Tesla worked night after night, driven not by the potential bonus but by the thrill of perfecting a system he found inherently flawed. When he presented the improved designs, every inefficiency corrected, every weakness strengthened, he expected not gratitude, but acknowledgement. Instead, Edison allegedly replied, "Tesla, you don't understand our American humor." The words struck Tesla with quiet devastation, less because of the money, and more because of what they revealed. The gulf between their values was not shrinking, it was widening. Tesla resigned soon after. He left Edison's company with no savings, no prospects, and no allies. What he did have was an idea so vast that it could not survive under Edison's shadow. For months he struggled, digging ditches once more, his hands blistered, his clothes worn thin. Yet even in those moments, he felt a strange serenity. Hard labor could tire the body, but it could not touch the realm where his mind roamed freely. At night, as he walked home from work, he would pause beneath the gas lamps and imagine electrical systems humming invisibly beneath the pavement. He could feel alternating currents rising and falling like tides, turning unseen wheels, illuminating cities not yet built. Edison had given him work. America had given him hardship. Now the future would give him purpose. And soon a new figure would enter Tesla's life. A man bold enough to believe in the impossible, rich enough to fund it, and visionary enough to challenge Edison himself. His name was George Westinghouse. The true electrical war, the war that would decide how the world would be powered, was about to begin. After leaving Edison's company, Tesla found himself once again at the bottom, digging trenches for the installation of Edison's own power cables. The irony was not lost on him. He was literally burying the infrastructure of a system he believed the future would reject. Yet even in those grueling months, knee-deep in mud and exhaustion, his mind remained fixed on a single idea. Alternating current was not merely another electrical method. It was the electrical method, a system not of force, but of harmony, one that moved like nature itself, oscillating, rhythmic, balanced. It flowed the way planets spun, the way waves rose and fell, the way the pulse of life itself traveled through the body. Tesla felt that direct current, with its linear push, was a kind of mechanical stubbornness. Alternating current was music, and he had already written the score. All he needed was someone willing to listen. That opportunity came quietly, in the form of a new investor who was curious about Tesla's strange patents. The man belonged to a small group willing to gamble on unconventional ideas. And when he heard about Tesla's concept for a motor powered by alternating current, he arranged a meeting. Tesla arrived with nothing but his notebooks and the conviction that he had solved a problem no one else could. He sketched the rotating magnetic field in precise strokes, explaining how the current would shift direction in cycles, creating a smooth, continuous turning force. No brushes, no friction, no sparks. A motor that would run with a grace no one had ever seen. The investor listened, asked a few questions, and then said something Tesla had not heard in years. "I believe you." Tesla's eyes widened, not with pride, but with relief. Belief was oxygen to him, and he had spent too long gasping. Within weeks, Tesla formed his first company, the Tesla Electric Light and Manufacturing Company. But business was not Tesla's natural environment. Investors wanted quick profits. Tesla wanted perfection. They wanted lamps he could patent and sell. Tesla wanted to reinvent physics. The inevitable happened. The company collapsed. The investors kept the patents. Tesla was left with nothing. Again, he wandered the streets of New York in despair, sleeping little, eating less, talking to no one. He later recalled that this period nearly broke him completely. And then, as if the universe refused to let him fall, help arrived. A group of new investors approached Tesla with a different offer, one that centered not on lighting systems, but on his true passion, a complete alternating current system. They gave him a modest laboratory on Liberty Street. Tesla filled it with the sounds of humming coils and the scent of ozone. For the first time, he had a place where imagination could become reality. Here, the birth of AC truly began. Tesla built coils that resonated like tuning forks. He created circuits that glowed with soft violet light. He designed motors that spun with a smoothness engineers had never witnessed. And he refined his inventions entirely through thought before constructing them, ensuring that each device he built emerged nearly perfect on the first attempt. Visitors to his lab watched in stunned silence as he demonstrated motors powered by invisible currents, wires humming softly while copper rotors spun in silence. When he explained the principle, people often shook their heads in disbelief. "If you do not understand now," he would say gently, "the future will explain it to you." But the future would not need to. A man named George Westinghouse was about to walk into Tesla's life, and he understood immediately. Westinghouse arrived at the lab in 1888 after reading Tesla's published patents in awe. He watched the demonstrations with growing excitement, recognizing not just the brilliance of the machines, but the scale of their potential. "This," Westinghouse said, will change everything. He offered Tesla a contract that would secure him financially for years, $1 million in modern terms, plus royalties. With a signature, Tesla's work became the core of a new electrical empire. And just like that, the battle lines of the modern world were drawn. Edison's direct current, entrenched and established. Tesla's alternating current, elegant and inevitable. Two systems striving not just for market dominance, but for the right to define the future. The war of the currents was about to begin, but Tesla was not thinking of war. He was thinking of cities lit effortlessly, factories powered without strain, and villages far from any generator finally receiving the gift of electricity. He did not merely want AC to succeed, he wanted the world to succeed. Because for Tesla, alternating current was more than an invention. It was a philosophy, the belief that energy should flow with the harmony of nature, not the resistance of industry. This philosophy would soon transform into the most dramatic technological rivalry of the age, one that would test Tesla's ideals, Westinghouse's resolve, and Edison's empire. The world was changing, its currents were shifting, and at the center of that shift stood a quiet man with a vision he refused to surrender. When George Westinghouse extended his hand to Nikola Tesla, he was not simply welcoming a new inventor into his company, he was inviting a revolution. Tesla, however, was moved more by the realization that his ideas would finally live. Money mattered little to him. Legacy mattered everything. With Westinghouse's support, Tesla built prototypes of his AC motors on a scale he had never before attempted. Engineers gathered around his demonstrations, watching as currents slipped through coils like invisible rivers, creating smooth rotational motion with no sparks, no brushes, no breaking points. This was elegance incarnate. This was the future, humming softly in iron and copper. But for Edison, it was a threat, perhaps the greatest of his career. Edison responded in the only way he knew, with relentless, forceful opposition. His direct current infrastructure was already spreading through New York, supplying power to factories, theaters, and homes. He had built not just a system, but an identity, one intertwined with the promise of American progress. And now he feared Tesla's AC would erase it. Edison launched a public campaign to discredit alternating current, calling it deadly, dangerous, a menace to society. He funded demonstrations where animals were electrocuted with AC, spectacles intended to terrify the public. Even the invention of the electric chair, powered by alternating current, became part of this strategy. The message was simple: direct current is safe. Alternating current kills. It was a deliberate distortion, a theater of fear, and Tesla, who saw electricity as beauty itself, was horrified. But he refused to retaliate in kind. He would not turn science into spectacle. Instead, he kept working. The rivalry reached its peak during the preparations for the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, the Great World's Fair of 1893. The fair's organizers needed a system capable of lighting more bulbs than had ever been illuminated at once. Edison's company submitted a proposal using direct current. Westinghouse submitted one using Tesla's alternating current. The decision would determine not only the fair's lighting, but the future of global power. When the bids were opened, Westinghouse's offer was dramatically lower. Tesla's AC system required far fewer generators and could transmit power over long distances without enormous losses. It was efficient where Edison's system was costly, elegant where DC was cumbersome. Westinghouse won, and when the fair opened, 600,000 electric lamps burst into light, powered by Tesla's system. The white glow illuminated the night sky, reflecting off the lagoons and buildings of the White City in a breathtaking display that stunned visitors into silence. People later said it felt like witnessing the dawn of a new kind of civilization. Edison's direct current had lit towns. Tesla's alternating current had lit the world, but the victory came at a price. Westinghouse Electric faced financial strain as Edison's allies pressured the market, drove down stock values, and engaged in lawsuits intended to suffocate the company. At one point, the burden of Tesla's royalties threatened to bankrupt Westinghouse entirely. When Westinghouse visited Tesla to discuss the crisis, he expected negotiation. He did not expect mercy. Tesla quietly took the contract, tore it in half, and placed it on the table. "You have given life to my inventions," he said. "Now you must give life to your company." With that gesture, Tesla surrendered what would have become a colossal fortune, an act of generosity almost unimaginable in the industrial world. To him, the triumph of alternating current meant more than wealth. It meant fulfillment of destiny. Westinghouse survived, Tesla remained loyal, and AC continued its march across the world. By the late 1890s, Tesla's system powered cities, industries, and homes across America and beyond. The war of the currents was over. Direct current was not defeated. It would still have uses, but alternating current had emerged as the backbone of modern civilization. For the first time, Tesla saw the world bending, however slightly, toward the shape of his imagination. He had taken the force that once frightened him as a child, the lightning, and made it obedient, useful, elegant. But victory carried a shadow. The world was now ready for Tesla's mind, but his mind was drifting toward ideas far stranger, far wilder, far more revolutionary than rotating magnetic fields and power stations. Wireless light, wireless communication, wireless energy, a world connected not by wires but by the earth itself. And this next chapter of Tesla's life would transform him from an engineer into a legend. There are moments in history when human ambition meets the raw power of nature, and the result is something close to myth. For Nikola Tesla, that moment was Niagara. Long before engineers ever set foot in the gorge, before contracts were signed or blueprints drawn, Tesla had stood on the cliffs overlooking the roaring cataract and whispered a prophecy to his companion. "One day, I shall harness this waterfall. I shall make the power of Niagara serve the world." It sounded like fantasy. No one had ever attempted to tame a natural force of such magnitude. But decades later, after years of struggle, sacrifice, and visionary insistence, the impossible became inevitable. Niagara would not just power a town or a factory. It would become the first great symbol of Tesla's alternating current world. The challenge was formidable. The falls thundered with a power that, while awe-inspiring, was chaotic and uncontrollable. Engineers from around the world submitted designs, systems of gears, wheels, levers, each attempting to force the waterfall into mechanical obedience. Most proposals looked like giant contraptions from Victorian dreams, towering hydraulic structures, mechanical arms, elaborate turbines. All were intricate, expensive, and ultimately flawed. What the project needed was not brute force. It needed elegance. It needed a system that allowed nature to flow rather than fight. It needed Tesla. When Westinghouse presented Tesla's AC system to the commission, the idea was simple yet revolutionary. Convert the raw energy of falling water into rotating magnetic fields, then transmit that energy miles away with minimal loss. No gears, no massive mechanical assemblies, just pure electrical transformation. Some engineers scoffed. Edison's supporters argued that AC at such a scale was madness, courting disaster. But the arguments collapsed under the weight of possibility. Tesla's system was the only one that could carry power beyond the gorge, across counties, across states. In 1893, the contract was signed. Tesla had won. The world was about to witness electricity born from the beating heart of the earth. Construction began on an unprecedented scale. In the bowels of the power station, enormous Westinghouse generators, designed according to Tesla's principles, were assembled with meticulous care. Each machine towered over the workers, a cathedral of metal and copper. They were not just engines, they were sculptures of physics, magnetic fields waiting to awaken. As the turbines turned, water rushed through with the force of creation itself, spinning massive wheels that, through Tesla's AC system, would convert motion into energy pure enough to travel miles with scarcely a flicker. On the day of activation, workers gathered as if attending a ritual. There was no fanfare, no parade, just a quiet sense that something extraordinary was about to happen. A switch was thrown. For a moment, nothing. Then, with a soft rising hum, the generators came alive. The magnetic fields rotated. Current surged through cables stretching all the way to Buffalo. 60 kilometers away, lights flickered and then blazed to life. A city illuminated by a waterfall. The crowd watching in Buffalo erupted into applause. Newspapers described it as the dawn of the electric age. Scientists compared it to Prometheus bringing fire to mankind. It was not simply a triumph of engineering, it was a transformation of the natural world into a partner in human progress. Tesla, learning of the success, remained characteristically calm. He had expected nothing less. Later he would say, "The giant waterfall has spoken, and it has said that alternating current is supreme." For Tesla, Niagara was not just a victory in the war of the currents. It was a personal vindication. The moment the world finally aligned with the reality he had long carried inside his mind. The thunder of the falls had once been a symbol of nature's raw, unreachable force. Now it hummed with the frequency of Tesla's dream. Niagara became the blueprint for hydroelectric power across the globe. Europe, Asia, South America, all would adopt variations of Tesla's system. The planet itself became a reservoir of energy waiting to be tapped. Yet even as the world celebrated, Tesla's thoughts were already drifting elsewhere. Niagara proved that electricity could be transmitted over great distances. But what if it could be transmitted without wires at all? What if energy could move through the air the way thoughts move through the mind, effortless and invisible? Niagara was a triumph of engineering. Tesla's next dream would be a triumph of imagination, one that would push him toward the very edge of scientific possibility. The era of alternating current had begun, but Tesla was already reaching for the next frontier. By the mid-1890s, Tesla had become something rare in American life, a scientist whose work felt like sorcery. Newspapers called him the Wizard of Manhattan, a title he accepted with a polite smile and quiet amusement. He did not believe in magic, but he understood why others did. In a world still lit by dim gas lamps, Tesla could make entire rooms glow with wireless light. In an age when electricity itself felt mysterious, he stood inside cages of lightning, untouched and serene. Where others saw danger, he saw harmony. Where others saw impossibility, he saw inevitability. His laboratory on South Fifth Avenue became a theater of astonishment, a place where the future seemed to slip through cracks in the present. People who visited Tesla's lab often left transformed. They would step inside expecting coils, wires, and the usual clutter of mechanical invention. Instead, they found a space that felt almost alive, filled with the hum of oscillating currents, the faint aroma of ozone, and devices whose purpose seemed to belong to another century. Assistants recalled how Tesla moved through the room with quiet precision, as if guided by intuition rather than sight. He rarely needed notes. His mind held the full architecture of every experiment, every adjustment, every variable. Journalists described him as a man who thinks in lightning. One of the first demonstrations that cemented his legend involved a simple glass tube. With the room darkened, Tesla picked up the tube, unconnected to any wire, and as he walked across the floor, it began to glow with a pale, haunting light. No flame, no filament, no battery, just a whisper of blue-white radiance following him like a firefly. Reporters gasped. Scientists leaned forward, trying to understand. Tesla merely lifted the tube higher, rotating it slowly in the air. "Light," he said softly. should not require wires. It should be as free as thought. In that moment, he demonstrated principles of fluorescent lighting decades before such lamps would become commonplace. And it was only the beginning. Tesla's laboratory became a magnetic pole for the curious, the ambitious, the wealthy, and the influential. Luminaries of science and industry visited him. Artists and writers sought inspiration from him. Mark Twain became a frequent guest, delighting in Tesla's experiments like a child in a kingdom of wonders. It was Twain who begged Tesla to let him stand inside the circle of electrical fire produced by a high-frequency coil. Tesla, amused, obliged. Twain stepped forward, laughing, until the current caused an unexpected physiological effect that had him sprinting for the restroom, a story Tesla retold with great pleasure for years. Even moments of humor carried the weight of legend, but beneath the showmanship was a mind tirelessly shaping the framework of modern technology. During these years, Tesla developed radio transmission, wireless lighting, resonant transformers, early concepts of remote control, foundational principles of robotics. He designed circuits that vibrated at frequencies the human ear could barely comprehend. He created coils that produced immense voltages without burning their wires. He wrote articles predicting a world connected by invisible waves, a global information network. Yet for all the wonders of his lab, Tesla himself remained mysterious. He avoided small talk. He ate alone. He slept little. He lived in a world half real, half imagined. His greatest priority was not fame nor wealth, but exploration. He believed the secrets of the universe were accessible to those who listened closely to nature's rhythms. High frequency, resonance, vibration, these were not merely engineering principles. To Tesla, they were reflections of deeper laws. "Nature," he wrote, "is a perfect conductor of truth." Visitors marveled at the technological miracles, but what struck them most was the man behind them. He would stand motionless as lightning crackled around him, his face calm, illuminated in pulses of ultraviolet fire. He seemed immune to fear, immune to distraction, immune to everything but the pursuit of understanding. In those moments, Tesla was not performing. He was conversing with energy, with rhythm, with the invisible architecture of reality. The world saw a wizard. Tesla saw only a scientist obeying nature's logic. And yet, for all his brilliance, Tesla knew that the coils and lights and humming machines in Manhattan were only stepping stones. They were demonstrations, not destinations. If electricity could be transmitted wirelessly across a room, could it be transmitted across a city, across a continent, across the earth itself? Tesla believed it could, and he intended to prove it. But to do that, he needed a laboratory on a scale that Manhattan could not contain, a place where he could unleash storms of electricity larger than anything the world had ever seen. That place waited for him far from the city, in the wide, open plains of Colorado. There, Tesla would call lightning out of the sky. There he would listen to the heartbeat of the planet. There he would take his next step toward a wireless future. The Wizard of Manhattan was about to become the master of lightning. By 1899, Tesla felt the walls of Manhattan closing in. Not physically, he still loved the city's vibrancy, its ceaseless motion, but intellectually. His experiments had grown too large, too bold, too dangerous for the confined rooms of South Fifth Avenue. The sparks that once danced harmlessly across his coils now leapt with a ferocity that shook the very foundations of the building. His dreams had outgrown the city. He needed space. He needed silence. He needed the sky itself. Colorado Springs offered all three. Located high on the plains beneath the shadow of Pikes Peak, the town was remote enough to tolerate his experiments and elevated enough to give him proximity to the atmosphere he wished to study. When Tesla stepped onto the platform at the small railway station, the air felt thinner, sharper, charged with a clarity that made his pulse quicken. He breathed deeply. "This," he said, "is where the future will be revealed." Tesla's laboratory in Colorado Springs was unlike anything the world had ever seen. A vast wooden barn crowned with a 200-foot mast, topped with a gleaming metal sphere. From a distance, it looked almost like an alien observatory, a device built not to gaze at the heavens, but to speak to them. Inside, coils the size of carriages sat in neat rows, copper wires twisted across the ceiling like veins in a giant organism. At the center stood a single monumental Tesla coil, a machine capable of generating voltages so immense that no other electrical engineer dared to imagine them. Tesla believed the Earth itself was a conductor, that deep beneath the crust, natural electrical resonances pulsed like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. He was determined to wake it. When the first experiments began, the locals heard rumors. A strange blue light flickered from the laboratory at night, rising and falling with irregular pulses. Sometimes the entire building glowed faintly, as if wrapped in ethereal fire. Townspeople whispered that Tesla was calling lightning like a sorcerer in pursuit of forbidden knowledge. In truth, Tesla was working with something simple, elegant, and terrifying: resonance. He discovered that when he tuned his coils to match the natural frequencies of the earth and sky, the energy multiplied rather than dissipated. His equipment began to hum with growing amplitude, each cycle feeding on the last. One night he pushed the system further than ever before. Assistants watched nervously from the edges of the room as Tesla adjusted the controls with quiet, deliberate movements. The lights dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again. Suddenly, a crackling halo of blue fire erupted around the coil. Lightning spears shot from the mast into the open sky, branching in all directions, illuminating the plains for miles. Thunder shook the ground, sparks danced across the floor like living creatures, and the scent of ionized air stung the lungs. Tesla stood calmly in the center of the storm he had created, a silhouette carved in lightning. Witnesses later said that in those moments he seemed not entirely human, more like an emissary of the forces he commanded. But the energy he unleashed was so vast that it overwhelmed the power stations supplying the laboratory. The generators in town sputtered, faltered, and died. Entire districts of Colorado Springs went dark. Tesla, unaware of the blackout, continued adjusting his instruments until the experiment reached its peak. Only when silence returned, broken by the faint crackling of dissipating charge, did he step back, eyes shining. "We have awakened a new power," he whispered. These experiments were not merely displays of electrical spectacle. They were the foundation for Tesla's boldest vision: wireless transmission of energy. He believed that by charging the Earth with electrical resonance, power could be distributed freely through the atmosphere, lighting cities, powering machines, energizing entire continents without wires, stations, or losses. He saw a world glowing gently with blue fire, a world united by a single global electrical pulse. To him, it was not science fiction, it was an inevitable evolution. "In the future," he wrote, "the forces of nature will obey us through the air itself." And in Colorado, for the first time, he felt the universe whisper back in agreement. But nature is generous only to a point. Tesla began experiencing strange interruptions, signals he had not generated, pulses he could not explain. His equipment recorded rhythmic patterns, faint but unmistakably structured. He wondered if they were electrical fluctuations deep in the earth, atmospheric anomalies, or something else entirely. "I felt," he later wrote, "as though I was listening to the conversation of distant intelligences. Whether this was imagination or discovery remains debated, but for Tesla, the experience strengthened his conviction that he was touching forces greater than humanity had yet understood." After months of experiments, trials, and exhaustion, Tesla left Colorado Springs drained but triumphant. He had glimpsed the architecture of a wireless future, seen it with such clarity that he believed its realization was now within reach. He returned to New York with a new purpose and a new dream, to build a tower that would transmit power across the world. A tower that would speak to the earth the way his coils had spoken to the Colorado sky. A tower that would redefine civilization forever. Wardenclyffe was waiting, and Tesla was ready. When Tesla returned from Colorado Springs in 1900, he carried with him not just notebooks filled with measurements and diagrams, but a sense of revelation. He had touched something vast, something that reached beyond electricity, beyond engineering, beyond even human comprehension. The world still struggled to understand alternating current, yet Tesla was already thinking decades, sometimes a century, ahead. To him, the future was not a distant horizon. It was a visitor, standing quietly in the doorway, waiting to be acknowledged. And in the early years of the new century, Tesla's mind moved into territories so uncharted that even today, many of his writings read more like prophecy than science. The birth of wireless communication, long before radio became a household technology, before antennas crowned rooftops or waves carried voices across oceans, Tesla was already shaping the foundations of broadcasting. He understood that the air itself could be a conductor, not of lightning, but of information. In his Manhattan laboratory, he demonstrated a transmitter capable of sending signals across long distances. Reporters who witnessed these experiments left bewildered, uncertain whether they had observed science or enchantment. Tesla would hold a small coil, touch it lightly, and produce oscillations strong enough to activate receivers across the room. "It is not the wire that carries the message," he explained. "It is the space between." Years before Guglielmo Marconi conducted his famous transmission, Tesla envisioned a global wireless network, a system through which messages, images, even power could travel without metal cables. When Marconi used Tesla's patents to transmit the first transatlantic signal, Tesla responded not with bitterness but with quiet certainty. "Marconi is a good fellow. Let him continue. He is using 17 of my patents." History would later confirm the truth. Radio was Tesla's invention in principle and in architecture, but the world was only beginning to see how deep his imagination truly went. The first robot. The year was 1898. The venue, Madison Square Garden. At the center of the exhibition hall, a small boat floated inside an indoor pool. Its metal hull glinted under the electric lights. On a stage nearby, Tesla stood before a curious crowd and lifted a box covered with mysterious switches. Reporters leaned forward. Spectators murmured. Tesla smiled faintly. He flipped a switch. The boat began to move, forward, backward, turning left, turning right, obeying commands that arrived not through wires, but through invisible signals. People gasped. Some shouted accusations of trickery. Others insisted Tesla had hidden a trained animal inside the hull. Tesla denied all of it. "This," he announced, "is a machine that thinks." What he demonstrated that evening was nothing less than the world's first remote-controlled robot. He understood what almost no one else did, that machines could respond to commands, store instructions, perform tasks independently, and eventually operate with a degree of autonomy that mimicked intelligence. It was the birth of robotics, long before the word existed. Tesla predicted a future where intelligent machines would perform labor, eliminate human error, fight wars without risking soldiers' lives, roam the earth, sea, and sky, learn from experience. To many, these ideas were fantasy. To Tesla, they were a natural extension of physics, the vision of a connected world. Perhaps the most astonishing aspect of Tesla's imagination was its scale. He did not simply envision a device or a process. He envisioned civilization transformed. In his articles and lectures, he described a global system of wireless communication, allowing anyone in the world to hear the news of the day from portable devices. A network of stations transmitting messages, images, stock quotes, music, and data across continents. Handheld tools capable of receiving signals anywhere on Earth. Machines guided by signals, responding like automatons endowed with reason. A world where distance vanished, replaced by instantaneous connection. Today we call this the internet. We call them smartphones. We call them drones. We call them wireless networks. Tesla called them the logical future, and he described all of them between 1890 and 1905, decades before any existed. The problem of perception. Yet for all his brilliance, Tesla struggled against the limits of human imagination. When he described wireless power stations circling the globe, newspapers mocked him. When he suggested remote-controlled machines, people accused him of conjuring fantasies. Even some colleagues in the scientific community feared his ideas were too radical, too vast, too unsettling. Tesla understood why. He wrote, "The present is theirs. The future for which I work is mine." He had no desire to argue, no interest in persuasion. He felt that the world would understand when it was ready, but the world was about to force him into his greatest and most tragic experiment, the attempt to build a device that would unify all of his ideas into one colossal achievement. Wireless power, wireless communication, global connection, a machine that would allow humanity to step into the invisible architecture of energy that Tesla believed surrounded the Earth. This machine would take the shape of a tower. It would stand on Long Island. It would be called Wardenclyffe, and building it would cost Tesla everything. When Tesla stepped onto the sandy soil of Shoreham, Long Island in 1901, he felt the same thrill he had experienced in Colorado, the sense of standing at the threshold of something vast, something that pulsed beneath the surface of ordinary perception. But unlike Colorado, this place was not a temporary laboratory or a rented barn. Wardenclyffe would be permanent. It would be monumental. It would be the physical embodiment of his greatest dream, a world connected by wireless energy and communication. Tesla surveyed the land, listening not to the wind or the surf, but to the imagined resonance of future currents humming across continents. In his mind, he could already see the tower rising, its mast reaching skyward, its coils vibrating with power, its signals traversing the globe like ripples in a cosmic ocean. He wrote to a friend that Wardenclyffe would be the crowning achievement of my life. He did not exaggerate. The project would require a staggering amount of money, even by the standards of America's industrial boom. And so Tesla turned to a man whose wealth seemed limitless, J.P. Morgan, titan of finance, ruler of Wall Street, a figure whose influence shaped entire nations. Tesla explained his vision plainly, a tower capable of transmitting messages, images, and eventually power without wires to any point on Earth. Morgan listened, intrigued but cautious. "What will people do with wireless communication?" he asked. Tesla answered without hesitation. "They will send news, music, commerce, intelligence to any point on the globe. The Earth will be joined in thought." Morgan agreed to fund the initial construction with $150,000, a sum equivalent to several $1 million today. It was enough to begin, but far from enough to complete the project. Still, Tesla accepted. He believed that once the tower rose, once the world saw the glow of wireless energy pulsing from its crown, money would flow as surely as the currents he envisioned. Construction began at once. The Wardenclyffe Tower grew steadily from its foundation, a 187-foot wooden structure topped by a great copper dome, built to resonate with the Earth itself. Beneath the tower, Tesla oversaw the digging of an enormous well, nearly 120 feet deep, to create electrical contact with the planet's natural currents. To Tesla, the Earth was not a passive sphere of rock. It was a conductor, a resonator, a colossal dynamo waiting to be awakened. He believed he could send electrical pulses through the ground that would emerge anywhere on the planet, available to anyone with a simple receiver, as freely as air or sunlight. This was not mere invention. invention. It was philosophy. Energy should not be owned, it should be shared. And therein lay the seed of his downfall. As construction continued, Tesla's ambitions grew. He confided to journalists that Wardenclyffe would not just transmit signals, it would transmit power. Entire cities could be lit from a single source. Machines could run without fuel. Ships could cross oceans without coal. Airships, precursors to modern aircraft, could draw energy from the air itself. The newspapers, once dazzled, began to turn skeptical. Was Tesla promising too much? Was he drifting from science into fantasy? Word reached Morgan that Tesla's vision had expanded beyond communication into something far more disruptive, a system that might replace the industries and monopolies that made Morgan wealthy. One evening, Morgan summoned Tesla to his office. "Can your tower transmit power wirelessly?" Morgan asked. Tesla, honest by nature, answered, "Yes, to any place on Earth." Morgan leaned back in his chair, his eyes cold and calculating. "If anyone can draw power from the ground," he said quietly, "where do we put the meter?" It was the question that doomed Wardenclyffe. Morgan pulled his funding. Other investors, wary of opposing the titan of finance, withdrew as well. The project stalled. Workers were dismissed. Construction slowed to a halt. Tesla stood alone beside the unfinished tower, staring up at its silent dome. For a man who spent his life imagining the impossible, this was the first time his dream felt truly out of reach. Wardenclyffe never spoke. It never hummed or pulsed with the resonant frequencies Tesla envisioned. It never sent a spark of wireless power into the world. Instead, it stood like a monument to human ambition, half completed, surrounded by weeds, a towering shape against the sky that drew curiosity, then pity, then neglect. Tesla visited it often, walking the grounds in silence, touching its beams as though consoling a sleeping giant. He believed that if he had just a little more time, a little more funding, a little more faith from the world, he could still make it work. But time was running out. His debts mounted. His inventions were seized by creditors. The tower itself became collateral, and the dream that had defined his life began to fade. Yet Tesla never spoke of Wardenclyffe as a failure. To him it remained unfinished, not broken. The world was not prepared, he said, but it will be. He believed that future generations would resurrect his ideas, that wireless energy would someday become as commonplace as wireless communication, that the principles he touched in Colorado Springs would eventually shape a new technological age. Wardenclyffe was ahead of its time, perhaps centuries ahead, and though the tower would eventually be dismantled, sold for scrap, and erased from the physical world, it remained unshakable in the realm where all of Tesla's greatest inventions first lived, the realm of imagination. Tesla had reached the pinnacle of his creative power and the edge of financial ruin. His tower stood motionless. His patrons had vanished, and the world was moving on without him. But the man who dreamed of lighting the earth had one more transformation ahead of him. He would not return to grand laboratories or massive towers. Instead, he would walk deeper into the world of ideas, into the philosophies of energy, nature, and the human spirit. What followed was not invention, but reflection, not machines, but meaning. Tesla's life was entering its twilight, and in that twilight he would become something rarer than an inventor. He would become a philosopher of the technological age. When the work at Wardenclyffe finally stopped, Tesla felt a silence descend upon him far deeper than the absence of electrical hum or mechanical rhythm. It was a silence of purpose, a stillness where something vast had once lived. The tower had not failed in function, it had simply never been given the chance to speak, and yet its very stillness marked the unraveling of the greatest ambition Tesla had ever dared to shape into reality. He walked the empty grounds often, his footsteps soft against the sand, the unfinished tower rising above him like a cathedral missing its altar. It was here, not in the thunder of Niagara or the blue fire of Colorado, that Tesla felt something unfamiliar settling into his bones. Defeat, a quiet, contemplative defeat, not the collapse of intellect, but the collapse of possibility. The world of 1905 was changing swiftly. The roar of new industries drowned out the whispers of dreamers. Automobiles crowded the streets. Telephones multiplied in cities. Airplanes, clumsy at first, began to lift from the ground. Everywhere Tesla looked, the future he had predicted was unfolding, but not in the form he had imagined. Instead of unified energy flowing freely across the globe, there were wires, tangled, monopolized, owned. Instead of towers sending waves through the earth itself, there were antennas rising atop corporate buildings. Instead of wireless power, there were companies selling electricity by the kilowatt hours. Progress had come, but quietly, methodically, profitably, not as revelation, but as business. This new world was not unkind, but it was indifferent. It honored practicality over vision, stability over wonder. And in such a world, Tesla's dreams, grand, boundless, expensive, had no patrons left. The financial collapse hit Tesla with unrelenting force. Creditors circled Wardenclyffe like scavengers. The land was repossessed, the equipment seized, the laboratory left to rot. Tesla, once celebrated in newspapers as the man who bent lightning to his will, found himself unable to pay rent on his hotel room. He began moving between hotels in Manhattan, often leaving behind unpaid bills. Staff members watched him with a mixture of pity and confusion. How could the man who had illuminated the world have fallen so low? Tesla rarely answered questions about money. He regarded wealth as a distraction, useful but never essential. Yet the truth pressed on him. He had built a tower to reshape civilization, and in return civilization had taken everything he owned. In 1917, while Tesla lived in a modest room at the Hotel Pennsylvania, a group of workers arrived at Wardenclyffe. War had come to America, and the towering structure, visible from the sea, was rumored to be a potential threat, a beacon that might aid enemy ships. Under orders, the workers brought dynamite. Tesla was not present. He did not watch. He did not want to. Those who witnessed the demolition described it as strangely solemn. The wooden frame trembled, the copper sphere cracked, and the tower collapsed into itself with a kind of exhausted sigh, as if the structure knew it had waited too long for a dream that never arrived. When Tesla heard the news, he said nothing. He simply closed his eyes. Later, to a friend, he whispered, "My tower was built for the future. The future has not yet come." In the years that followed, Tesla withdrew further from public life. He lectured occasionally, presented papers, attended banquets in his honor, but the spark of ambition that once lit his eyes had softened. He became quieter, more introspective, turning his attention inward toward questions of energy, vibration, consciousness. He wrote of new ideas, particles of immense destructive power, beams of energy, methods for detecting distant objects, machines that could respond to human emotion. Some understood, most did not. And gradually the newspapers that once celebrated him began to focus instead on his eccentricities, his precise dietary habits, his fear of germs, his affection for pigeons, the long solitary walks he took each night. They called him strange, unpredictable, a fallen genius. But those who knew him best saw a different truth. Tesla had not collapsed. Only the world's capacity to imagine had. Behind all the loss, one thing endured: Tesla's unbroken faith in the future. He still believed, quietly, stubbornly, that humanity would one day rediscover his principles, that free energy, global communication, intelligent machines, and planetary harmony were not fantasies, but inevitable stages of evolution. He once said, "I am disappointed, yes, but not defeated. Defeat comes only when the world stops thinking." And Tesla never stopped thinking, even as the tower vanished, even as his fame drifted, even as his wealth dissolved. One truth remained unchanged. His mind was still awake, brilliantly, relentlessly awake, and it was already wandering toward new realms of possibility, realms that would not reshape industry, but illuminate something deeper, the invisible architecture of existence itself. When the machinery quieted and the towers fell, Tesla did not retreat into despair as many expected. Instead, he drifted into a new phase of life, one not defined by laboratories or inventions, but by contemplation. The man who once tried to electrify the earth now turned his attention to subtler forces, intuition, vibration, the hidden harmonies of nature. He had always been an inventor, but in the final decades of his life he became something quieter, yet perhaps even more rare, a philosopher of the technological age. By the 1910s and 1920s, Tesla's writings took on a tone that blended physics with metaphysics, science with poetry. He believed that the universe was not a random array of forces, but a symphony, structured, resonant, and fundamentally connected. Everything is vibration, he wrote. To understand the universe is to understand frequency. This idea was not mystical to him. It was the logical extension of the resonance experiments he had conducted in Colorado Springs, where he had felt the pulsing heartbeat of the earth. He believed that every object, every organism, every thought had a natural frequency, and that harmony or disharmony within those frequencies shaped both matter and mind. In this worldview, electricity was not merely a tool, it was a universal language. If spoken correctly, it could heal. If misused, it could destroy. If understood, it could unify. Tesla also became increasingly concerned with humanity's moral and social trajectory. He saw wars erupting, political tensions rising, industries consuming resources at unsustainable rates. Yet he believed these crises were temporary, the turbulence of a species still learning to master its own potential. He predicted that future generations would abandon warfare not out of morality, but out of efficiency. Machines, guided by remote control or autonomous intelligence, would replace soldiers, making the very concept of battle feel primitive. He wrote, "War will end because it is illogical, not because it is immoral." Tesla envisioned a world where technological progress shaped human ethics, not through force, but through opportunity. An age where energy was abundant and clean, poverty became a relic. Nations collaborated rather than competed. Scientific understanding replaced superstition. Humanity learned to speak in the language of the universe. These ideas were not naive. They were extrapolations, logical conclusions drawn from the evolution of industry and communication. Tesla was not dreaming, he was forecasting. But if Tesla's mind ranged across cosmic questions, his personal life grew increasingly solitary. He lived in a succession of New York hotels, first the Waldorf Astoria, later the St. Regis, the Hotel Pennsylvania, and finally the modest Hotel New Yorker. His rooms were sparse, tidy, almost ascetic. A single lamp, a stack of books, a few notebooks filled with equations and philosophical musings. He maintained strict habits. He ate only at specific hours. He walked the same quiet routes each night. He avoided handshakes, fearing germs. He wore immaculate gloves. He counted steps subconsciously, often without realizing it. These eccentricities, exaggerated by tabloids, concealed a deeper truth. Tesla sought order in a world that rarely offered it. Patterns soothed him. Repetition focused him. Structure kept his mind from fracturing under the weight of its own intensity. But of all his rituals, one baffled observers the most: his love for pigeons. Every morning and evening, Tesla visited the parks of Manhattan, feeding the birds with a gentle devotion usually reserved for close companions. One pigeon in particular, a white bird with gray-tipped wings, captured his heart. He later admitted, "I loved that pigeon as a man loves a woman." People ridiculed him for this, but Tesla was not speaking of romance. He was speaking of connection. The pigeon represented innocence, trust, and purity of intention, qualities he felt humanity had not yet mastered. As Tesla aged, His ideas grew both more refined and more speculative. He spoke of a particle or primary force underlying matter, methods to tap limitless energy from the environment, non-physical phenomena that hinted at deeper structures of reality, a unifying principle that could connect consciousness and physics. Some called these ideas eccentric, others visionary. Tesla himself remained humble. "The mind is sharper and keener in seclusion," he wrote. "Originality thrives in the freedom of solitude." He never abandoned scientific rigor, but he recognized that the greatest discoveries often begin as intuitions, whispers of possibility that logic later confirms, and he felt certain that many of his theories, though unproven in his time, would find validation in centuries to come. By the late 1920s and early 1930s, the world had largely forgotten Tesla. New inventors captured headlines. New industries reshaped cities. New wars darkened the horizon. Tesla walked quietly among these changes like a ghost who could see the future but no longer influence it. Yet he did not resent the world for moving on. He believed that ideas, once born, belong to humanity, not to their creators. He wrote, "The present, though lacking appreciation, is but a stepping stone. The future will redeem the misunderstood." And in a sense, it has. Today, many of Tesla's predictions, global communication, robotics, wireless networks, renewable energy, shape modern civilization. But in his final decades, he was not yet vindicated. He was simply a man walking the streets of Manhattan, feeding birds, writing quietly, dreaming tirelessly. The inventor had become a philosopher. The philosopher was becoming a legend, and soon the world would catch one final glimpse of Tesla's ambition, a vision not of harmony but of power, before his light began to fade. By the 1930s, New York had grown into a shimmering monument of steel and light, its towers piercing the night sky, its avenues buzzing with automobiles, its streets alive with the restless pulse of modern life. Yet hidden among the crowds was a solitary figure, tall and thin, dressed impeccably in a dark suit and gloves, moving with the slow, deliberate grace of someone existing half within the world and half outside it. This was Nikola Tesla in his twilight years, no longer the celebrated wizard of electricity, no longer the prodigy who lit the White City, no longer the visionary who built towers to touch the sky. He had become instead something quieter, stranger, more enigmatic, the night walker of New York. By day, Tesla stayed mostly in his room at the Hotel New Yorker, surrounded by stacks of notebooks, a few personal belongings, and the silence he cherished. He rarely took visitors. He answered the phone only when necessary. But as evening fell, he transformed. He would rise, adjust the cuffs of his immaculate suit, brush his hair back with precision, and step into the city, not as an inventor seeking opportunity, but as a contemplative traveler wandering through a world he had helped create, yet no longer belonged to. He preferred quiet streets, especially those lined with trees or near the river, where he could hear the subtle rhythms of nature beneath the city's mechanical heartbeat. He avoided loud crowds, bright lights, and the chaotic clang of traffic. He walked for miles, sometimes until dawn. To observers, he appeared lost. To Tesla, he was never more found. Walking was his meditation, his method of thinking, his way of communing with the invisible architecture of the universe. In the steady rhythm of footsteps, he found patterns. In the hum of street lamps, he heard frequencies. In the fluttering of leaves, he sensed resonance. Even in old age, Tesla's mind remained a laboratory, quiet, expansive, endless. More than anything else, it was the pigeons who accompanied Tesla in these final years. He visited Bryant Park daily, sometimes multiple times, carrying small bags of seed purchased with what little money he had left. The birds recognized him instantly. They would descend from rooftops, lampposts, and window ledges the moment he approached, gathering around him in a soft, cooing chorus. Tesla spoke to them gently, addressing each as though it were an old friend. To most people, it looked like eccentricity. To Tesla, it was connection. One pigeon in particular, a pure white bird with soft gray markings, became the center of his affections. She followed him, waited for him, and visited his hotel room window each morning. Tesla said, "I loved that pigeon. Yes, I loved her as a man loves a woman. She was the joy of my life." He explained himself carefully. "When she was near, there was purpose in my life." The world mocked him for this confession. But Tesla was not speaking of romance. He was speaking of empathy, of finding, in a gentle creature, the loyalty, trust and purity he had rarely encountered in human affairs. The pigeon represented the one constant in a life filled with betrayals, collapses, and unmet dreams. When she eventually fell ill, Tesla cared for her personally, spending what little money he had on treatments, specialists, tonics. And when she died, he later confessed that something in him died as well. "The light," he whispered to a friend, "went out of my life." Even as age thinned his hair and slowed his steps, Tesla's mind remained vibrant. He continued to write essays on energy and vibration, often filling notebooks long into the night. His handwriting changed, more fragile, less controlled, but the ideas remained immense. He spoke of a new energy weapon capable of ending all wars, methods of detecting aircraft with beams of radio waves, machines that could clean the atmosphere, devices that could harness cosmic rays, ways to tap limitless power from the environment. Newspapers called them fantasies. Historians today call many of them early forms of radar, particle beam technology, and renewable energy principles. He may have walked slowly, but mentally he was still decades ahead. In interviews, he remained eloquent, philosophical, sometimes melancholic, but never bitter. When asked about his dwindling fame, he simply said, "The future will judge, and it will justify." He believed deeply that ideas were immortal even if their creators were not. New York had grown around him, towering higher, glowing brighter, moving faster than ever before. People rushed past him on sidewalks, unaware that the frail man feeding pigeons in the park was the architect of the electrical age they lived in. Children pointed at him, curious about the tall, thin gentleman with gloved hands and a distant gaze. Few recognized him, fewer approached him, yet Tesla never resented his anonymity. He had lived long enough to see his ideas misunderstood, mocked, stolen, celebrated, forgotten, revived, and misunderstood again. He knew the rhythm of innovation. He knew that the world remembers only when it is ready. And even if he walked alone, he walked in a world powered by his imagination. Street lamps glowed because of him. Trolleys hummed because of him. Factories roared because of him. Cities lived after sunset because of him. The Wizard of Manhattan had become its quiet guardian ghost. In the evenings, Tesla often returned to his room exhausted but peaceful. He would sit by the window overlooking the city, watching the lights flicker across the skyline, each one a tiny imitation of the brilliance he once summoned from coils and towers. He felt no anger, only acceptance. "My work," he wrote, "is like that of a sculptor, only instead of marble, I carve in the medium of thought." As the world entered a new era of conflict and change, Tesla drifted into the background, a shadow moving through hotel corridors, a solitary figure feeding birds in the park, a genius the world had not yet fully understood. But the night walker of New York was not finished. In the final years of his life, he would produce one last series of startling ideas, grand, controversial, electrifying. Ideas that would both fascinate and frighten a world hurtling toward war. Ideas that hinted at the storm he had carried inside him since childhood. By the late 1930s, the world was accelerating toward a future Tesla had foreseen with astonishing clarity. Radios crackled in every home, airplanes crossed oceans, factories hummed with alternating current. Wireless communication, automation, computation, ideas that had once existed only in the chambers of Tesla's imagination, had become cornerstones of modern life. And yet for Tesla himself, recognition came too slowly, too quietly, too late. The man who had imagined the 20th century before it began now found himself living in its shadow, present but out of sync, as though he had stepped into a future that had not been designed for him. He watched as younger inventors received acclaim for technologies built on foundations he had laid decades earlier. He read articles celebrating breakthroughs he had predicted line by line in forgotten journals. He listened to speeches that spoke of progress, efficiency, and electrification, words pulled from vocabularies he had authored in obscurity. The world had finally arrived in Tesla's tomorrow, but it had arrived without remembering who pointed the way. As war clouds gathered over Europe and Asia, governments began investing heavily in new forms of technology: radio navigation, early radar systems, automated weapons, long-distance communication networks. Tesla watched these developments with a strange mix of pride and melancholy. He had, after all, described such devices decades earlier. He had insisted, to anyone who would listen, that machines would communicate through the air, that waves could detect distant objects, that robots could replace human soldiers, that intelligence could be transmitted, stored, and amplified. Now, at last, the world believed. But it believed scientists with funding and institutions behind them, not the aging inventor feeding pigeons in Bryant Park. He did not envy them. What he envied was time. Time to finish Wardenclyffe. Time to refine the visions still alive in his notebooks. Time to see humanity embrace the future with responsibility rather than fear. But time, too, had moved on without him. During the tense political climate of the 1930s, Tesla unveiled a concept he believed could end warfare entirely, a particle beam weapon he called the Teleforce. Journalists, in search of headlines, called it the death ray. Tesla hated the term. The device, he insisted, was not meant for destruction. It was meant for deterrence. If every nation possessed the ability to repel invasion instantly, he believed, conflict would become obsolete. He described the invention boldly: a concentrated beam of high-energy particles capable of striking targets miles away, generated from compact, self-contained power units, cheap enough for every nation to deploy. To skeptics, it sounded fantastical. To modern physicists, it resembles early particle beam accelerator concepts. Tesla offered the plans to the US, the UK, the Soviet Union, and Yugoslavia, not for profit but to secure peace. None took him seriously. The world was preparing for war, not for deterrence. Humanity was not yet ready to believe in weapons that prevented violence rather than amplified it. Tesla, disappointed but unshaken, wrote, "My inventions will be understood when the world is ready, and not before." It was a truth he had lived all his life. In his final years, Tesla rarely left the Hotel New Yorker except for his evening walks, but every so often he visited the rooftop terrace, gazing out across the glowing city he had helped electrify. Below him stretched thousands of lights, the direct descendants of the rotating magnetic field he had conceived in Budapest, the motors he had refined in Manhattan, the power systems he had proven at Niagara. Every illuminated window, every street lamp, every humming building was an echo of his genius. Yet he stood there in silence, unrecognized. Behind him the world celebrated practical men, executives, manufacturers, politicians. Ahead of him, the rising century prepared to praise new inventors who would reshape electronics, computing, and energy. Tesla stood alone between eras, the last visionary of the old world, the first architect of the new. He did not resent his solitude, but he understood it. The future he imagined had arrived, yes, but it had arrived without asking for him. In the years just before World War II, Tesla gave a series of interviews that revealed the clarity and melancholy of an aging but unbroken mind. Reporters expecting rambling or confusion left astonished by the precision of his thoughts. He spoke of radar-like systems to detect aircraft, global wireless communication, renewable energy from wind and sun, machines that could think, a worldwide peace, enforced not by force, but by knowledge. These ideas, far from fantasies, would become pillars of future technology. But at the time, they were dismissed as the eccentric musings of a forgotten genius. Tesla knew otherwise. The world, he said, moves slowly, but it moves always toward greater intelligence. He smiled faintly then, as if listening to a distant signal only he could hear. By the time recognition began to return, by the time scientists started revisiting his theories, by the time governments quietly examined his wartime proposals, by the time young inventors rediscovered the beauty of his ideas, Tesla was already reaching the end of his journey. The world had caught up to his predictions, but Tesla had already pushed far beyond them, into visions humanity would not understand for another century. He had lived his life according to an inner compass, one that pointed not north or south, but forward, always forward. And though he would never again build great machines or towering laboratories, his final years were not the fading of a legacy, but the quiet glow of a light that had always been years ahead of its time. The future had arrived, but not in time for Tesla. He had been a century early, and he knew it. Long after Tesla's footsteps faded from the sidewalks of Manhattan, long after the pigeons no longer gathered at Bryant Park waiting for the tall, gentle man with pockets full of seed, the world began to rediscover him. Quietly at first, like a faint signal emerging from static, then louder, clearer, until finally the name Tesla no longer belonged only to old newspaper clippings or patent archives, but to the very fabric of modern civilization. He had once said that the present belonged to others, but the future would belong to him. And so it began. Walk through any modern city, and you walk inside Tesla's mind. The rotation of every electric motor, whether in factories, appliances, subways, elevators, follows the magnetic dance he first envisioned in a Budapest park. The alternating current system he refined with Westinghouse pulses beneath streets, beneath oceans, beneath continents. The electrical hum that fills the modern world is not merely sound, it is Tesla's signature. Look deeper, and his influence grows even more palpable. Radio, though others received credit during his lifetime, the essential principles, tuned circuits, wireless transmission, resonant frequency carry his intellectual DNA. Remote control, every drone in the sky, every robotic arm in a manufacturing line, every wireless machine responding to unseen signals echoes that little boat Tesla guided in Madison Square Garden. Fluorescent light. His early experiments with cold wireless illumination became the foundation for modern lighting. X-ray imaging. He captured shadowy radiographs before the word X-ray was even popularized. Neon signs. Manhattan's shimmering advertisements owe their glow to his early gas discharge experiments. Everywhere, in every system of modern infrastructure, Tesla's fingerprints remain. Not always credited, not always recognized, but undeniably present. The world that once ignored him had been built in his image. As the 20th century progressed, Tesla's ideas, once dismissed as fantasies, began resurfacing in the work of scientists who had never met him, but unknowingly followed the paths he had mapped a lifetime earlier. Wireless communication, which Tesla had described in detail decades before the first radio broadcast, evolved into satellite networks, GPS, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, smartphones. Each new advancement echoed a line from his notebooks, a line the world had not yet been ready to understand. In 1926, he described a portable wireless device through which people could communicate instantly across the world, see live images, access information, and carry it in their pocket. Nearly a century later, the smartphone emerged, the physical manifestation of Tesla's imagined instrument of infinite communication. He had been right about radio waves. He had been right about automation. He had been right about global information networks. He had been right about wireless technology stitching the Earth together. The world kept catching up. The idea that ruined him, the dream of wireless electricity, has begun to reappear. Scientists today experiment with resonant inductive coupling, wireless power transmission, Earth ionosphere waveguides, long-range energy beaming, high-efficiency resonators modeled after Tesla's coils. Engineers who once studied his notebooks out of curiosity now study them out of necessity. His belief that the Earth could transmit energy like a giant conductor remains controversial, yet increasingly plausible in certain contexts. A century late, perhaps, but no longer impossible. When Tesla demonstrated his remote-controlled boat in 1898, the public laughed. Machines could not think, they could not respond, they could not learn. But Tesla insisted that they could, and that they would. Today, autonomous robots roam factories, oceans, and skies. Machine intelligence processes information faster than human minds. Self-driving vehicles move through cities. Drones perform tasks once reserved for soldiers or pilots. Algorithms coordinate the movement of entire populations of machines. Tesla had predicted all of it, not as fantasy, but as inevitability. The human mind, he wrote, will one day be replicated in the machine. We are living in that prediction now. After decades of obscurity, something remarkable happened. Tesla became a cultural icon. His name, once a footnote, now stands as a symbol for innovation, rebellion against convention, unbounded imagination, the future itself. Universities study him, companies adopt his name, authors and filmmakers resurrect him, physicists cite him, engineers revere him, dreamers claim him as their patron saint. In popular culture, he is cast as the misunderstood genius, the prophet ignored by smaller minds, the man who bridged magic and science. While the reality of his life was more complex, more disciplined, more scientific, more human, his myth reflects something true. Tesla represents the possibility of thinking beyond limits. He represents the courage to imagine. Tesla left no children, no great fortune, no empire, but he left something far more enduring, a horizon humanity is still walking toward. Every technological leap, every attempt to unify information, energy, communication, and consciousness brings us a step closer to the world Tesla envisioned long before anyone else. His dreams echo in the quiet hum of electric motors, in the invisible signals flowing around us, in the networks binding continents, in the glowing screens in every pocket, in the quest for renewable energy, in the rise of artificial intelligence, and in the enduring belief that science is not merely a tool, but a path toward human evolution. Tesla once said, "The gift of mental power comes from God, divine being, and if we concentrate our minds on that truth, we become in tune with this great power. Whether one believes in his metaphors or not, one truth shines unmistakably. Tesla tuned himself to the frequencies of the future, and the future is still catching up." In the winter of 1943, as snow drifted quietly through the canyons of Manhattan, Nikola Tesla lived his final days in room 3327 of the Hotel New Yorker, a modest space for a man whose imagination had once stretched from the earth to the heavens. He moved less, ate little, spoke rarely. The world beyond his window pulsed with neon and electricity, every light an echo of his mind's earlier brilliance. He was old now, thin, solitary, nearly invisible to the city he had helped illuminate. But inside, the storm still flickered. At night, he would sit in his armchair, gazing out at the skyline, watching the glow of alternating current pulse through the veins of New York. He would place a hand on the window and feel the warmth of the lamps below, the living proof of a world he had imagined decades before it existed. He had not built the future alone, but he had seen it first. On January 7th, 1943, Tesla lay quietly in his room, weakened by age but undiminished in spirit. He had spent the previous evening writing notes, fragments of ideas, reflections on energy, sketches of inventions he believed would one day reshape the world. When the maid found him the next morning, He appeared as though he had simply drifted into sleep. His hands were folded neatly. His face was calm. Outside, the city he helped power continued its ceaseless hum. Tesla died alone, but he did not die forgotten. In time, the world would realize that the man who slipped quietly from life in a hotel room had altered the destiny of civilization. Within hours of Tesla's death, the U.S. Office of Alien Property seized his papers, boxes filled with notebooks, diagrams, equations, and writings that were rumored to contain ideas decades ahead of their time. Scientists combed through them, searching for anything that might provide strategic advantage during the war. Some documents were returned to his family years later. Others vanished into classified archives. A few remain the subject of speculation even today. But one truth endures. Tesla continued working until his very last breath. Still thinking, still imagining, still reaching into a future he believed humanity would one day inherit. For decades after his death, Tesla's name drifted like an electrical echo, present in patents, whispered among engineers, debated in lecture halls, but only gradually did the magnitude of his contributions become undeniable. Today, we know. He invented the system that powers the modern world. He pioneered wireless communication. He predicted smartphones, drones, radar, and renewable energy. He laid the foundation for robotics and remote control. He envisioned global networks before the first radio broadcast. He imagined a world unified by invisible forces long before such a world existed. And yet his life stands as a reminder that genius is not always recognized in its own age. The present rarely sees the future clearly. It must grow into it. Tesla lived not for praise, but for possibility. Not for wealth, but for wonder. Not for recognition, but for revelation. Tesla matters because he defied the limits of imagination. He matters because he saw beauty where others saw machinery. He matters because he believed science was not a set of facts, but a language through which the universe speaks. He matters because he dedicated his life to progress, sometimes to his own detriment, out of a belief that knowledge, freely shared, could elevate humanity. And he matters because the world he envisioned, a world of wireless energy, instant communication, intelligent machines, and global interconnectedness, is the world we now inhabit. But deeper still, Tesla represents something essential about the human spirit, that it is capable of seeing what does not yet exist and bringing it, slowly, courageously, into being. If Tesla had been born a century later, he might have led today's revolutions in energy, computing, and artificial intelligence. But perhaps he was meant to be early, meant to prepare the path, to sketch the blueprint, to whisper the first hints of a future humanity would spend decades trying to understand. He did not live to see his vindication, but he knew it would come. Near the end of his life, he wrote, "The scientific man does not aim at an immediate result. He does not expect his advanced ideas to be readily taken up. His duty is to lay the foundation for those who are to come and point the way." Tesla pointed the way, and the world followed, slowly, imperfectly, but undeniably. Today, when we switch on a light, when we send a message across the globe, when machines think beside us, when energy flows across continents, we are living inside his vision. Tesla did not simply imagine the future. He saw it. He believed in it. He built the doorway to it. And through that doorway, the rest of us have only just begun to walk.